President-elect Trump is slamming Joe Biden after he commuted the sentences of 37 of the 40 federal death row inmates. He posted this on Truth Social. As soon as I am inaugurated, I will direct the Justice Department to vigorously pursue the death penalty to protect American families and children from violent rapists, murderers, and monsters. We will be a nation of law and order again. Biden's decision sparking a strong reaction from the families of those inmates' victims. The daughter of Donna Major, a South Carolina bank teller who was killed during a 2017 robbery, is furious that her mother's killer was resentenced. Watch.
I am upset that this is even happening, that one man can make this decision without even talking to the victims, without any regard for what we've been through, what we're going through. I'm completely hurt, frustrated, and angry.
Another commutation includes Jorge Avila Torres. He was sentenced to die after sexually assaulting and stabbing two young girls to death in 2005. 8-year-old Laura Hobbs and 9-year-old Crystal Tobias. 4 years later, he strangled 20-year-old naval officer Amanda Snell. Joining me now, constitutional attorney and Supreme Court bar member Mark Smith. Mark, I want to get your reaction to all of this.
Well, I think the big picture, Cheryl, is this puts the lie to the notion that the Democrats and Joe Biden respect the rule of law. They respect the process. They even respect their own Department of Justice. That was the message we kept hearing when they were pursuing Donald Trump with all that lawfare. Then all of a sudden, it turns out Donald Trump wins the election. And next thing you know that indeed, Joe Biden has no interest in the rule of law, the process. He wants to rule as a king and basically waves a magic wand and pardons his son, Hunter Biden, and now engages in the commutation of these individuals who are found to be deserving of the death penalty by juries and judges across this country. And yeah, I think it puts a lie to the notion that Joe Biden, the Democrats, respect the rule of law. At the end of the day, it's about politics to them, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it seems that politics is at play in the courts, in particular with these judicial nominations. 3 Democrat-appointed judges canceling their retirement plans. And that blocks President-elect Trump from appointing their successors. It's thought to be a highly unusual move. It is sparking outrage from Republicans who see it as political and a maneuver for them to keep control of the courts. President Biden, meanwhile, is under fire. He vetoed the Judges Act. That was a bipartisan bill that would have created 66 new judgeships. The bill had widespread support. Critics say his veto was also a political move aimed at preventing Trump from shaping the courts even further. Mark, your reaction?
I think this is a great show of weakness by the Democrats and Joe Biden, because this was a bipartisan bill and it was going to create 22 new judgeships for the next 4 years and another 22 and another 22 over the next 3 presidential presidencies. And what's quite interesting is almost a sign that the Democrats fear that after Donald Trump would have the opportunity to appoint 22 federal judges, that potentially President Vance might have a chance to appoint another 22. But at the end of the day, I think this speaks volumes about how the Democrats view President Trump and his ability to transform the federal judiciary from a group of many judges that are outcome oriented to a group of law and order conservatives that are originalists, because there is no president in U.S. history since Franklin Delano Roosevelt that has done more to transform the federal judiciary than President Trump, with his confirmation of 3 Supreme Court justices, Kavanaugh, Barrett, and of course Gorsuch. So yes, as far as I'm concerned, this is a show of weakness by the Democrats and Joe Biden to say they recognize that Donald Trump is very effective on this issue when it comes to federal judges.
You mentioned the Supreme Court. I do want to ask you about that as we go into this next term. One of the things that Kamala Harris campaigned on was, of course, that Donald Trump could, and now he still could, get 2 more Supreme Court nominations. That's if you have 2 retirements. I'm not saying Clarence Thomas is retiring. I'm just saying that's a possibility. What do you make of that, and are you hearing anything about the future of the Supreme Court in the next 4 years?
Well, obviously, it's always very quiet, and justices, these are lifetime decisions that justices have to make, and you have to respect the careers of Justice Thomas and Justice Alito and all the justices on the Supreme Court. But so no, there's no official indication of one way or another. But obviously, these justices are aware of what happened with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where she unfortunately passed away at the end of Donald Trump's term and was replaced by conservative Justice Barrett, and obviously. the justices are aware of that dynamic. Now, I'm not saying that's going to influence their decision. These are very personal choices. These are lifetime appointments. But yeah, I think that's a big question. Will Donald Trump have an opportunity to nominate one or more Supreme Court justices moving forward? And that is a big question that we're going to be talking a lot about, Cheryl, in the month of June as the Supreme Court winds up this term.
No, Clarence Thomas, was in the fight of his life to get that appointment. If you go back several decades now to those confirmation hearings, which I sadly recall because of my age. Let's move on to the issue of immigration and criminal activity. United Healthcare CEO, murder suspect. I'm sorry. Let me stop really quick. I do want to ask you about that. There's a lot of discussions with the role of local and state officials fighting against immigration. I do want to get to the Luigi Mangione story in a moment. My apologies to the producers, but I did want to ask you about that because we're seeing this legal fight now that is beginning with immigration, and some of these sanctuary cities and these city councils saying that they're going to fight back. This is all going to go to the courts, which is going to stifle Tom Homan's efforts to do these mass deportations. I did want to get your take on that.
Well, look, nothing requires state and local officials to help the federal government on any issue. But the one thing that state and local authorities are not allowed to do is interfere with federal enforcement of law, including immigration law. Now, what's interesting, Cheryl, is that the first Trump term, we saw a lot of federal district court judges enjoy nationwide all sorts of immigration policies. But what's quite interesting, in the last 4 years with this current Supreme Court, they have made it very clear, Cheryl, that they're not going to allow federal trial judges to enter nationwide injunctions. So I think we're not going to see the same dynamic where you have a single judge in Hawaii enjoining nationwide immigration policy for this president. I think it's going to be a much different dynamic and a much more favorable one in favor of President Trump and the enforcement of federal immigration laws than we saw in 2016 through 2020.
Interesting. All right, back to Luigi Mangione. That is the murder suspect with the United Healthcare CEO that was killed. He did plead not guilty earlier in the week. I do want to get your take on this case as we move forward. He's expected back in court very soon.
Well, obviously, this is going to be a very long process, Cheryl, in terms of the legal, there's going to be discovery and exchange of information and investigations. Obviously, his attorneys will have to make a lot of decisions about the potential defense. But I think there's one important message that I think is sometimes getting lost here is to the extent that you believe that Mangione engaged in an act of terrorism, we have to be very careful about what that means, because terrorism is an act of violence where you're trying to effectuate some sort of political, social, or cultural change. And to the extent we play into his alleged hand of starting to talk about the political issues that he wanted us to discuss, we're actually rewarding bad behavior. And I think we as a nation need to be very careful. Yes, this is a case that has to be adjudicated on the merits. Did he commit the murder? What was his motive? What was the intent? Yes, you have to play out the rule of law. Of course you do. But we have to be very careful, in my opinion, not to allow, if his goal was to start a political conversation about, let's say, health insurance in America, that we don't reward that bad behavior, because it sets a very bad precedent, Cheryl, for other people down the road. We don't want to encourage this at all for obvious reasons.
Absolutely. Mark Smith, lots of topics with you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Mark. Good to see you.
Thanks, Cheryl.